Okay, it's 9:05, so we'll get started. I'll keep an eye, of course, anyone else might be coming in. But once again, welcome everybody. My name is Stephanie Puchkowski, Director of Admissions here at Niagara. Like I said, I see some familiar names on here, so I'm very glad you can join us. This is something we do, regularly, and it's a huge help for everybody. And of course, just so you know, it will be recorded. So if you aren't able to stay on the whole time, or maybe know anybody that missed it, it will be sent out, so you'll be able to, watch it again or send it along if you need to. Also, of course, any questions that you might have, I will keep an eye on the chat box while Katie is talking. And then we'll hold questions for the end, and then we'll go through them at that point and answer everything for you. I don't think I'd be doing my job right if I didn't give a little bit of a plug. I just want something I want to mention since we're talking about FAFSA and scholarships. Just quickly, as I'm sure you may have heard, but our visit scholarship that we offer, I just like to mention it again as we approach the deadline. um, October 31st, as long as students apply to us and visit by that time, you'll get an automatic visit scholarship or grant to add it to your financial aid package, which is over the course of the 4 years. So the total is $5,000. So it'll be broken down over the 4 years and added to you automatically. So just something to share with your students if you know they're applying and maybe they haven't visited yet. If some students are from a distance, we're willing to do like virtual things like this too, and do a virtual tour and things like that. So please just let us know. I will leave my information in the chat box too. If anyone has any direct questions for me about students or anything like that, and need to follow up afterwards, you're welcome to reach out to me. But to not delay any longer, I will turn it over to Katie, the whole reason we were here. So, Katie, you can go ahead and take it away. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. My name is Katie Kosis. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Niagara. What we're going to go over today, it's pretty much a version of my financial aid night presentations that I've been doing at local high schools. So if you're from one of those schools, you probably already saw most of this, but hopefully maybe it can be a refresher. As Stephanie said, as we go along, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll answer them at the end. Feel free, if I'm not addressing something that you wanted, that you have a question on, feel free to put that in there too. Or if you need clarification on something that I went over. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. All right, Stephanie, can you see we're good? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so tips and tricks. The first part, we are going to go over. Oh, now it doesn't want to click. Hang on. Let's see. There we go. Here's our general financial aid email and our main line. If you have any questions about anything really FAFSA related or Niagara specific, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any FAFSA questions. If it's something specific to another school students applying to, of course, I recommend reaching out to those financial aid offices. But if you have general FAFSA questions or financial aid questions, we are certainly happy to help. What we're going to go over today, the first half of the presentation is on completing the FAFSA form and things to look out for and kind of take you along that process. And then the second half will go over what will be in like financial aid offers and understanding like a lot of key terms that we use often in financial aid and different scholarship and grant and loan options. Okay, so the FAFSA for 26-27, that is, if they are currently a senior in high school, that is the year that they'll be completing the FAFSA form for. It technically opened up actually a little early in late September, so it is officially open. You can go ahead and students can start applying. It typically will open up October 1st of every year. I do always not hesitate, but I always recommend that you pay very close attention to which year you are completing when you are in the FAFSA site. Technically, there are 2 years open right now. There's our current 25-26 year open, and then the 26-27 year for the upcoming seniors. Well, current seniors, upcoming freshmen. So please be sure that they are doing the correct one. So many times we start receiving FAFSAs for students and we're like, oh, nope, this wrong year. Got to do it all over again. So if you're helping a student or if you're giving presentations, please just reinforce that they need to do the correct year. If they're entering fall of 26, they need to do the 26-27 FAFSA form. In the meantime, if you're maybe working with juniors or even sophomores, and they want to just kind of get an estimate of where they might fall with their student aid index from the FAFSA form, they can do the federal student aid estimator. For seniors, I kind of just skip over this because at this point, FAFSA is open, you can go ahead and actually do it. But if you're working with, again, anyone other than a senior, you can recommend that they do the aid estimator on the federal site. What students should, well, hopefully have already done, or if not, they should do it very shortly along with their parents, is to create their studentaid.gov accounts or their FSA IDs, kind of called the same thing. They will need this in order to sign off on the FAFSA for student and parent. The students will need it if they want to take out any federal loans. If the parents want to apply for a Parent Plus loan, they will need their FSA ID. So this is something that is really the starting point for the process. They will need their basic demographic information, social security number, date of birth. They will each need an email address, and it has to be different email addresses. You cannot share, an FSA ID cannot share the same email address with another FSA ID. So it has to be unique email addresses. I also recommend when setting this up, in addition to what the information would they use when they're in the FAFSA, they should be using a personal email. Please do not use their school email, their high school email. As parents, don't use your work email. If you're no longer at that job, once a student graduates, they no longer have access to their high school emails, and then it's a bit harder to do the recovery methods if they need to reset passwords or get back in. So please make sure that you're using, personal email addresses that they have that they will continue to have after graduation or after leaving a certain job. As I said earlier, the student will need to create their own, and at least one parent will need to create their own as well. If it is a two-parent household, whether or not they need both parents to create one is based upon their tax filing status. So if they did married filing jointly in 2024, only one parent needs to sign off on the FAFSA and create their FSA ID. But if they did married filing separately, or if it's an unmarried but living together situation, like one person did single and one person did head of household, then both parents will need to create their individual FSA IDs because each parent will have to sign off on the tax information consent. So just a heads up on that. But as I said earlier as well, I recommend getting this done before you do the FAFSA. Technically, you can do it while in there, but it does tend to delay the process a little bit. Students and families should set up their FSA IDs now and have it ready to go, I'd say about a week before actually doing the FAFSA form. Once they get into the FAFSA, so the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The key word there is free. I know there's some sites that will, ask you to pay or to assist you and you pay for that. Please don't go to that. It's the official site is studentaid.gov. That is the federal site. It is a free process to do, a free application. If students and families need assistance, financial aid offices are more than willing to help, sit down with them or do a virtual session to help them complete the FAFSA if they run into any questions. It is the driving factor in determining eligibility for aid other than merit scholarships. Typically, merits are based upon, of course, what they've done in high school or SAT and ACT scores, whatever it might be, however they're submitting. That's outside of any aid eligibility based upon income. But most everything else is going to be based upon having that FAFSA form on file. 2627 based upon 2024 taxes. So hopefully those taxes are done. If you got an extension, I know typically it's a 6-month extension, so it would have been October 1st. If you go beyond that, you'll have to use estimates for now, but you'll have to go back after and then update it. We do recommend that parents and families complete it as soon as possible. My typical recommendations by Thanksgiving. Make sure to have it in by Thanksgiving. That way the schools will have it and can, once the student is accepted, can start to put together a financial aid offer. This is just an example of the site, the FAFSA site. As you can see, it does technically show 2 years. So the larger font is for 26-27, which is the year you're going to want to do, but it does still say 25-26. And again, sometimes families just get confused thinking, hey, we're in the 25-26 year. That's what we're going to click. But that would be incorrect and they'd have to do it all over again. So make sure that they save some time and do the correct form. What we're going to do now is kind of go through an overview of from a dependent student's point of view. So I know sometimes students can be independent, but because the majority coming out of high school are considered dependent, we're going to go that route. Reasons why they would be considered independent and only have to report their information and not parent information would be typically due to if like they're in legal guardianship, if they're homeless, if they have children of their own, if they're married, if they're a veteran, like there's a lot of reasons potentially, but most likely they're going to be considered dependent coming directly out of high school. I need to report the parents' information. So we're going to take it from that point of view. We do recommend that the student starts the FAFSA and then invites the parents. Technically, the parents can start it and then invite the student, but it doesn't seem to go as smoothly when that's the case. I'm not saying it won't work, but we have found that a lot of times, for some reason, there's issues with the invitation or whatnot. So we always recommend the student starting it and then inviting the parent to complete their section. So the student would log in with their FSA ID that they just created, the week or so prior. They would, go ahead and say that they are the student completing the FAFSA. Also, as a side note, I'm not showing every single screenshot. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of kind of just basic questions that they'll ask that they can, demographic information, or they'll ask about their ethnicity and their race and those types of things, which they can, go through on their own. That information is not shared with schools. It's just for federal purposes research purposes that they're asking those for. I'm skipping all those slides. We're just going to the ones that deal with, the income and the household size information. Okay, so they're going to say that they are the student. They're just going to be taken to review the information. This is pulling from their FSA ID. It should be correct if they just created it. If it's been a year or so, have them review it. Also, if parents are going into their section, make sure that they are reviewing that their FSA ID information is correct, address, all that stuff, if they've moved. Also, if a parent has created an FSA ID from a prior student, it would be the same FSA ID that they would use to sign off. They might have to update a password or something. Next, the student will be brought to the consent and approval screen. They just need to, read this and give consent and move on to the next screen. It is really important to note that if consent is not given by either the student or the parent, it's not going to be a valid FAFSA, and they would not be eligible for any type of federal assistance. Loans, grants, whatever it might be, they would not be eligible. It has to be a valid FAFSA to receive aid. What they're really giving consent to is consenting for the information that's on file with the IRS to be brought over into the FAFSA form. However, even if they didn't have taxes on file during that specific year, they still need to give consent. And this goes for both the student and the parent. So this is an important piece. There will be warnings that pop up if they say, no, I don't give consent. Pretty much it tells them, well, you have to in order to move forward. So it will have warnings. This really isn't as much of an issue now as it was a couple years ago when it was first introduced, but this is something that they would have to make sure that they sign off of. All right, it will then take them through those dependency questions. We're kind of skipping those because we are, again, assuming that they are dependent. It will say, hey, based upon how you answered, you're considered a dependent student. It will then ask about if they are unable to provide parental information. It will default to no, and that is where you want it to stay. It should only be in rare circumstances that the student is saying yes, they are unable to provide parental data, because if they do say yes to this question, asking about a direct unsubsidized loan only, the only aid that they would be eligible for is an unsubsidized loan only. No Pell Grants, no Opportunity Grants, no work study, no subsidized loan, just an unsubsidized loan. So this should be a pretty rare circumstance where they would say yes to this. It should be no if they're considered a dependent student. They then will have to report parental information. So it's going to take them through a little parent wizard to determine which parent they need or parents they need to report on the FAFSA. If it's a married household, both parents are married and living together, or unmarried but living together, bio parents I'm talking about, you're reporting both parents' information. However, it does get a little tricky when it's a divorced or separated household. In that case, if you were divorced or separated, as a family, you're going to sit down and figure out which parent provided the greater amount, more than 50% of the student's support during the previous 12 months. That's whose information is going to go on the FAFSA form. And if that parent happens to be remarried, then step parent's information also needs to go on the FAFSA form as well. First, and also there is, if parents want to do a little before determination, before they start to file the FAFSA, they go to the studentaid.gov website, search parents. They can do the parent wizard ahead of time to help them determine which parent or parents need to be reported on the FAFSA. And just to go into a little more detail on that, again, Cases of divorce or separation, it's whichever parent provided the most amount of support during the previous 12 months. If for some reason that support was 50-50, you then go to whichever parent has the greater amount of income and assets. So really what the government wants is for the parent who has the greater amount of income and assets to be reported, but this is the roundabout way of getting to that. Some things to take into consideration when they're trying to consider what counts as support. Child support received. If the parent received any federal or state benefits on behalf of the student, that would count as support. And also, if maybe the student is on one parent's health insurance over the other, that would count as support as well. So again, it's more of a family decision, kind of sit down and figure that out. But those are some things that hopefully can help in that decision process. Once they determine which parent, they'll move on to being asked about the student's tax information. So if if they filed taxes, it would have already been transferred over if they could find it on file with the IRS. And then they'll just be asked some additional, clarification information. What was their filing status and the income earned from work. If it's zero, they didn't file, they would respond accordingly. It will then take them to asset questions. Now, parents will also be asked about assets, but not until their section. So this is just the student's assets. We're going to go over what counts as assets. I know this can get a little tricky as well. It is now, unlike taxes 2024, which is based on that tax year, assets are as of the day that the student is filing the FAFSA. So it would be the total amount of cash savings or checkings in their accounts as of that day. If they have investments such as like stocks or bonds, they would report the net worth of that. If they have a business, they would report that. Typically, high school students don't have these things. Besides, of course, maybe some cash and savings and checkings. They don't so much have the other investments, but they will be asked it. If it's zero, you put zeros. We're going to go over, this is just the help text from the FAFSA. I know it's a lot of words, but it's just the help text when you're in the FAFSA and they can kind of hover over it and say, what is an asset? This is what pulls up. So we're going to go over just a highlight of that. If you have more in-depth questions, either put in the chat or feel free to ask later. It kind of goes over what net worth means when they're talking about trying to determine that. Investments would include, if the parents have, and this also applies to parents more so, if they have a second home or a rental property, it does not include the house that they live in. That's not included as an asset. They're like cars, vehicles, that is not included as an asset, none of that. But if they have like a rental property, trust funds, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, those types of things, 529 plans or other educational plans, those are considered assets. A little caveat with this is that if the student is the owner of a 529 or the parent is the owner of that 529, it gets reported under parent's assets, not a student one. So again, if the student is the owner of that educational plan or the parent is, it gets reported under parent assets, not student assets. Another thing to take into consideration with 529 plans is that if a grandparent is the owner or aunt, uncle, or somebody else, it doesn't get reported. It's only if the student or parent is the owner of that 529. And also, if you have multiple children and they have multiple 529 plans, you're not reporting the amounts for everybody. It's just for the student whose FAFSA you're working on. So that should help eliminate some of the assets that need to be reported. Okay. Also, actually, I got this question last night, and I think I might have answered it incorrectly. I'll have to go back with that. But UGMA and UTMA are actually assets of the student, not the parent. So that is one difference. 529 plans go under the parent assets, depending upon the owner, student or parent owner. But UGMA and UGTA or UTMA are under student assets. What investments are not? So what you would not include, the house you live in, life insurance, able accounts, retirement plans like 401ks, pension funds, annuities, all those things do not count as assets and would not be reported. Investment value kind of goes over that. And it also talks about businesses. One thing that's back this year that went away for a couple of years is a small business exclusion. So if it's under 100 employees, they do not have to report the asset of that. Or asset value, it would only be if it's over 100, would it be the value, the net worth of that business or farm would be reported. They also added fisheries this year, so fisheries can be excluded. If anybody out there owns a fishery, that can be excluded this year. I don't know why they just said it at that. This is just kind of update, going over the updates. Again, the small business exclusion is back, which is great, as well as the fishery and related expenses can be excluded too. After they get through that section, which again, for the students is typically not much, it's more so when you get to the parent section that they would have to report that. The student's going to list all the schools they want the FAFSA to go to. I always recommend, if the student is thinking about it, put it on the FAFSA. Even if they haven't applied yet, even if they haven't been accepted, it's okay. List it on the FAFSA, it will go to that school. We will hold on to it until the student has been accepted, and then we can work on their financial aid offer. They can list up to 20 schools. So, which seems like a lot, seems like plenty. If they do need to do more than that, what they would do, they'd put the top 20, let it process through, takes, give about a week or so, go back in, take some schools off and put other ones on. But it's really important that they keep track of which ones they're taking off, because if they end up going to one of those schools, that school's no longer receiving any of the FAFSA updates that might come along. So important for them to kind of keep track of who they're taking off and adding if they need to do more than 20. They can search by state, by keyword, or like by the school name, by a city, so they can search and it would pop up with what might be available in that area. They would select them and they would just review their selections. Again, they can do up to 20. They're almost done with their part. They would just go to the review section, make sure everything looks good, and then they would invite the contributor. So the feds made this a little bit easier. I know I have to say I have not seen an action yet. So we haven't helped a student just yet work on the 26-27 FAFSA. But all they need to do is just have a parent email. They don't need to have their social security number anymore for this. They just need to have a parent email that they want it to go to. And it should be that simple. So we will see how it goes. Again, put the parent's email in there, send invite. The student will get a confirmation that the invite was sent, and they'll also get a code, which I think is on this screen. They'll also get a code that the parents can use to log in as well to accept the invite. The student then signs it, reviews it, signs it, and their section is done. But just because their section is done does not mean the FAFSA is submitted yet. They then need the parents to submit their section, which the parent should, in theory, get an email similar to this saying, hey, Katie has invited you to be a contributor. Do you accept the invitation? Of course, the parent would say yes. And then they would go and log into their studentaid.gov account that they created, hopefully earlier. They would log in with their credentials. They can technically create an account at this point. Again, we recommend that they do it ahead of time, but if not, they can do it at this point. And then they would enter the invitation code that was in the email and hit submit. And it would take them to their section to complete. They also need to give their consent. As I said earlier, everyone on the FAFSA needs to give their consent in order for it to be valid. They will be asked about their parents, or the parent will be asked about their own marital status. In this case, we're going with married, not separated, so the parents are still together. But again, if it was separated or divorced, they would answer accordingly. Now, this is a section where the students were not asked, but the parents will be. They'll be asked about federal benefits received. Now, it's anytime if anyone in the household during the 24 or 25 year received any one of these benefits. They don't have to know the amount, just whether or not they received them. And if it's none of the above or none of the apply, they would click that. But some examples would be like the earned income credit, free reduced school lunch, Medicaid, SNAP benefits, anything like that. One thing I wanted to mention on the free reduced lunch part is I know sometimes entire school districts will technically be eligible for their students to receive that. But in order for families to say yes to this, they need to have individually met those requirements to receive the free reduced lunch. So even though the entire school district might receive it, the individual family still has to meet those income requirements to say yes to this. The parents will then be asked some questions about their tax filing status. Did you file? Did you not? And then did they, file one with their current spouse? This is trying to determine if anyone else needs to be added as another contributor onto the FAFSA. And also, if you already gave consent and you had a tax return on file, a lot of the information is already pulled and you won't be able to see it. It'll just give the parent a little confirmation saying that it was transferred. Well, the next screen is an important one for parents to pay attention to because it's talking about family size. So based upon the number of tax exemptions between the student and parent, if they file taxes, The FAFSA is trying to determine on their behalf how many people are in the household. So in this case, they're saying it's 5. If that's not the case, if it's actually, more, then they would go ahead and they can update it in this section. So it's really important that they pay attention to this because it's not always correct that the exemptions are going to match the number in household. So they should definitely double check this number to make sure that it's accurate. And it's going to be for anybody who's going to be in the household between, 20, July 21st, 2026, all the way to June 30th, 2027. So for the upcoming year. After that, they will go on to the number in college. Now, they still ask this question. However, it no longer has any effect on federal aid eligibility. So it's still asked so that schools individually can take this into account when determining their financial aid offers. If they want to offer maybe additional institutional aid or whatnot, each school is going to be different in how they use this information. But it's still asked, the schools have it, but just know that it does not have any implications on the federal aid eligibility for the student. After that, now again, most of the information from the taxes for the parents will be transferred over. But if for some reason they couldn't find a tax return on file or something like that, they'll have to manually put in their tax information. So I always recommend having those 2024 taxes with the families as they complete the FAFSA, just in case they need to, pull something from a certain line if something did not pull over correctly. But for the most part, this information should already be there behind the scenes. And again, also, if it's just 0, they should put 0 in there. All right, after the tax information, back to assets, this time for the parents. It's going to be all the same things except for one little section. Parents are going to be asked about any child support received. And a little caveat with this, a little difference, is that the other assets are as of the day you're filing the FAFSA, but the child support received is going to be based upon the most recently completed calendar year. So this is going to be based upon when the parent files the FAFSA. If it is between now and December, 31st, it is going to be based upon 2024 year. If they do it in January or beyond, it's going to be based upon 2025 as the most recently completed calendar year. It might make a difference to some families, it might not. Families might not wait that long if they're trying, some schools have deadlines earlier up for their FAFSA. So if it makes a huge difference, they can maybe wait, but I recommend getting it done as soon as possible unless there's a really big difference in that amount. The last thing that the parents should be asked is to provide if there is another parent in the household, so if it's a 2-parent household, other parent information. In this case, all they're asking is the date of birth for the other parent. So it's pretty simple. And then they would move on to the confirmation, and they need to hit submit, and then their section is done. Now, if a second parent is needed due to the tax filing status, after the first parent gets through all what we just went over, the second parent will, have an email to log in. They will just have to give their consent for their tax information. They won't have to answer all those other like household size questions and federal benefits. Like that's just only one parent does that. The second parent's really just giving their consent for their tax information to kind of be transferred over. After the parent hits submit, the student will receive an email saying, hey, congratulations, it's been completed, it's now processing. And then once it is processed, they'll get another email and they can go in back to their FSAID account and log in to see their FAFSA submission summary. Now the submission summary will give them an overview of all the information they put in. They can't see tax information, that's all blurred out, whether it's for themselves or the parents, it's all blurred out, but they will be able to see the other information just to confirm it. In addition, they will be able to see what estimated federal aid that they might be eligible for. This is just federal, not state or institutional, just federal, and it's still just an estimate. It won't be final until the school gets the FAFSA and puts together that financial aid offer. But I give them an estimate for Pell, an estimate for how much potentially in loans they might be eligible for, maybe work study. But again, nothing's official until each school starts working on those packages. They will also be told what their SAI is, the Student Aid Index. In this example, it's a negative 1,500. That's the lowest it can go. It can go all the way up to like $1 million, but in this case, it's a negative 1,500. What this really means, or is an indicator of, in this case, is Pell Grant eligibility. So anywhere between a negative 1,500 to a 0 SAI means the student should be eligible for the maximum Pell Grant amount for the year, which for a full-time student would be $7,395 for this upcoming year. If their SAI is above a zero, they would still be eligible for Pell, but just a little bit less as you go the higher up. And the max SAI you can have and still be considered for some amount of Pell is like 14,700. Anything above that, they're not going to be eligible for any type of Pell Grant. It also gives a comparison of all the schools they list on their FAFSA. So it will tell you the graduation rate, the default rate, retention rate, median debt, and average annual cost based upon data that schools have to provide every year to the government. So this is a good thing. Most times parents like to look at this more so than the students, but it does give a good comparison between the schools that they put on their FAFSA. All right, so after that, each school will receive the FAFSA electronically within about 3 to 5 business days. Sometimes it's only a day or two. Weekends don't count, so it can take a little bit longer that way. If they do it, maybe on Thursday or Friday, we might not get it until maybe Tuesday. It really just depends. Once schools get those FAFSAs, they can start working on financial aid offers as soon as the student has been accepted. We can't do anything until that acceptance comes through at our school. Then you'll see a range of when financial aid offers go out. November some schools might be really on top of it and getting them out in November, but some might not be until April. Really depends upon the school. Here in Niagara, we send ours out usually that first week of January, right when we get back from Christmas break. One thing I also wanted to mention is a CSS profile. This would be in addition to the FAFSA form. It's not for every school. It's typically the more highly selective schools would ask for this. It's a lot more involved than the FAFSA form. They ask a lot more questions. They want to know in divorce situations, they want to know about the other parent, whereas the FAFSA does not. There is a fee for this, depending upon how many schools that you want it to be sent to. The schools will let you know if this is a requirement either through their admissions office or through the financial aid process. I can't speak too much on it. Here in Niagara, we don't use the CSS profile for financial aid awarding. This would not be for any federal aid. This is just for each school's institutional aid that they would like to give out. So that's why they, ask for additional information. This one also opened up on October 1st. So this is, available now for students to apply for if that school is requesting it. Okay, so much information on the FAFSA. I know that was kind of like a really fast overview. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. Stephanie, we will ask them as we get to the end. What we're going to go over now is once students receive those financial aid offers, either in the mail or through their portals, what are the things that they should be looking out for? What do some of these things mean? The first thing is the cost of attendance or the COA. Think of it as a budget. So by federal regulation, we cannot offer or award aid above and beyond that cost of attendance number. This usually comes into play when students receive a ton of outside private scholarships or when parents or families are trying to apply for either PLUS loans or student loans and they're trying to they want some refund. There's a limit to what we can certify. We can't go above that cost of attendance number. So the cost of attendance is comprised of two components, the direct cost and indirect cost. Direct costs are those things that you will see on the bill, tuition, fees, if they're living on campus, food and housing or room and board, however it might be termed at that school. So again, things you'll see on the bill. Indirect costs are things that we know students will encounter cost-wise over the 9-month academic year period, but you're not going to see on the bill. Transportation cost, personal cost, food and housing if they're commuting or living off campus, books and supplies, things that typically are not charged directly onto the student's bill. So these two things combine to create that budget number. It can vary widely from school to school. SUNY Niagara versus Niagara University versus Harvard have very different costs. So you're going to have very different costs of attendances. Even within the school, a resident student so living on campus compared to living at home, very different cost of attendances. So your package, the aid that is offered could change and typically does change between living on campus versus commuting. So if a student is trying to go between those two things, it's really important that they have ask what each difference would be at that school, because sometimes students and parents are surprised when some aid goes away when they move from being a resident to being a commuting student. So it's important to ask those questions beforehand. All right, then you have the student aid index, the SAI. This is the number that was derived from all the information you put in through the FAFSA. It goes through their process and it spits out that SAI number. It does stay the same regardless of the college you're applying to. It's calculated using their federal formula, and again, it spits that out. So that leads into financial need. So financial need, you're gonna hear that a lot. Oh, well, that's a need-based aid or a need-based grant, or you don't have financial need, you're not eligible. Well, what does that mean? And how do we determine that? So we take your cost of attendance, your budget number, minus away the student aid index from the FAFSA. And I know it can be negative, but anything below zero to us is a zero. And the remaining number is your financial need. And that means schools can package students with need-based aid up to that amount. So again, depending upon if you're living on campus or off, depending upon what program you're in, what school you're going to, your need is going to be different in each situation. So, what types of financial aid are students going to see in their financial aid offers? There's four main categories. Scholarships and grants are the first two. Free money, always want to take those, of course. Scholarships are more along the lines of the student did something to achieve that, and it's usually outside of any financial, um, eligibility. So, for example, like merit scholarships can be based upon what they did in high school or to previous college if they're transferring in. Maybe an athletic scholarship based upon their athletic talent, theater scholarships, like stuff that has nothing to do with their, financial income is. You could have a $10,000 income or $1 million income. The students would still be eligible for those scholarships. The next one is grants. These are typically more along the lines of having that need component. So like Pell grants, TAP grants from the New York State, need-based grants from the institution. So things are based upon having some either a certain income or that financial need component. The last two are what we call self-help. So loans, this would be either federal loans that are offered to the student through the FAFSA, private loans or plus loans. Loans have to be paid back after graduation or if they stop attending. And then employment. So this could either be through the federal work study program that's funded through the government. You do have to have financial need for that. Or it could be student employment through the school that has nothing to do, with having need, but they do have job opportunities on their campus. And of course, you're working to earn that money to use for personal expenses or to maybe make some payments on an outstanding balance. So who provides these sources of financial aid? So the federal government, probably the largest source. Again, it's going to be based upon having that FAFSA form complete. States themselves, we'll get into that in a little bit for New York State schools. Colleges and universities, as I said, merit scholarships, visit scholarships, resident, housing scholarships, endowed scholarships. Like there's a lot of things that schools can offer. And the last three kind of can be bunched together. Private sources, which can include community organizations, employers, TOPS, Wegmans, I know have scholarships for students that work for them. Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo. I always, talk about that one. That's a really good resource. High schools themselves, I know sometimes districts have specific scholarships for students attending, those schools. Look for as many local scholarships as they can. I know students don't always want to do it. I know high school counselors, it is, like beating a drum all the time about applying. But really they should. So many times just locally, even here at Niagara, we have some endowed scholarships that, we're begging people and students to apply for. We have one that's like $10,000. And yes, it has some specific criteria, it has to deal with cancer and and how that has impacted your life potentially with a family member, and they have to write an essay, but it's $10,000. There's a lot of money out there. They just have to apply for them. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir on that, but it is important that they try to find as many as they can. Even if it's $500, it helps with books. All right, let's go in a little bit deeper before we wrap up. So federal government, as I said, largest source of financial aid. Most of it is based upon having that need component for the most cases. And it is something that has to be applied for every single year. It should open up by October 1st of every year, and they can go ahead and apply for that. Sometimes families ask me, well, I'm not going to be eligible for anything. Why do I have to do that? Couple things. In New York State, we have those new guidelines or regulations that every high school senior needs to complete the FAFSA or do an opt-out waiver. So of course, we're encouraging all students to complete the FAFSA form. But also, just because you might not be eligible for anything federal, like Pell Grants or something, and just the loans, especially if you're applying to private schools, we have aid potentially that we can award that has nothing to do with federal aid eligibility, but you still need to have that FAFSA form on file. So I always encourage, at least for the first year, have the parents and the students apply for the FAFSA, see what they're eligible for. If, they didn't receive anything that's based upon having to have a FAFSA, they don't want the federal loans, they don't have to do it moving forward. But again, for the first year, they should at least do it for that year. Some of the common federal aid programs you'll see, Pell Grant, I've talked about this one before, probably the most well-known. The Teach Grant, this is for students thinking of going into the education field. There is an additional contract you have to sign for that. It can turn into a loan if you don't meet the requirements post-graduation, but something to think about for students going into the education field. The Opportunity Grant, one thing I wanted to mention about this one, you do have to be Pell Grant eligible to be eligible for the Opportunity Grant. But unlike the Pell Grant, where 5 million other people are eligible, you still get it. The Opportunity Grant, each school is given a very small bucket of funding for this. So even though families might technically be eligible, it might not be in their financial offers just because schools are given such a small amount. And also this is potentially maybe going away based upon, the reconciliation bill for the Higher Education Act. We'll see where that lands, but right now it is potentially on the chopping block for that. Federal work study, I mentioned this earlier as well. Students, it's funded through the federal government. Students, you do have to have that financial need component to be eligible. They typically work on campus. Each school is a little different with how much they offer and how many hours. In Niagara, it's about 10 to 12 hours a week. Students would work on campus in one of our offices or the rec center, something like that. All right, the last two are loans. Well, technically three. The last three are loans. You have subsidized and unsubsidized loans. These are loans that would be in the student's name based upon their FAFSA application. Now, they don't have to take them if they don't want to, but they will be offered it just by having completed the FAFSA form. Subsidized, it's a need-based loan. So you have to have that financial need component that we went over, that calculation we went over earlier. And then the government does pay the interest on this loan while they're in school. So they do pay the interest on the loan with the subsidized. They do not for the unsubsidized. So it is accruing interest as they go along. Now there are annual limits and aggregate limits for the sub and unsub loans. So for a combination of sub and unsub for their first year is $5,500. It goes up to $6,500 for their sophomore year, and then $7,500 for their junior and senior years each. Now, if there is no need eligibility in their calculation after all their other aid, you might just see all unsub. So it might be 5,500 unsub, or you might see a split of 3,500 sub and 2,000 unsub. Again, each person is going to be different based upon their financial need breakdown at each school. There is an aggregate limit as well. So it's 31,000 overall currently. That gets it about 5 years. So ideally they're graduating in 4, but if they do need an extra year, they should have 1 extra year of loan eligibility. And the last federal program we want to talk about is the PLUS loan. This is a loan, but it's in the parent's name. So the parents would sign in with their FSAID account that they created and apply for this loan. It's typically a lot easier to get than a private loan because it's based solely just on having a decent credit score and not having any delinquencies or bankruptcies in their credit history. They find out within 5 minutes if they've been approved or denied. Schools find out the next day. One thing about the PLUS loan I wanted to mention that some families and counselors are not aware, if the parent applies for the Parent PLUS loan and gets denied for the loan, the student would automatically get an additional unsubsidized loan in the student's name for up to $4,000 for their freshman year. It's $4,000 for freshmen and sophomores, then it bumps up to $5,000 for junior seniors. So that is really the only way for students to get any additional federal loan money in their name above and beyond the $5,500 standard limit is if the parent applies for the PLUS and gets denied for that. So one thing to keep in mind as they go along. All right, state aid programs. So if the student is a New York State resident, which I'm going to assume most everybody on the call is, but if not, they would have to check with the state that they are in. But for New York State students, they also have to fill out the state application. So you have the FAFSA form. At the very end of it, there should be a link saying, hey, do you want to fill out your state application? You can say yes to that and then go right there. It unfortunately does not transfer the information at this time. It used to before they, kind of revamped the FAFSA. That logic is not in place yet. Hopefully, maybe next year or the following year. But for now, it is technically a separate application. The student would have to create their New York State account, and then the parent would have to, there's like a PIN number that the parent would create to sign off on that. I believe they will need their New York State license to complete that for the parent. So New York State has a few different programs. We're gonna go over just a couple of them, probably the most well-known ones. So another thing to mention is that you can't travel with this grant. So the state money cannot cross state boundaries. You can't be going to Ohio, Pennsylvania, or Florida and use the state money there. You have to be attending a college or university in New York State in order to be eligible. There is the Tuition Assistance Program, TAP, probably the most well-known of that program. This one's based upon income, so it's $125,000 or less New York State net taxable income, and it's between student and parent combined. Okay, this can be used at public or private schools, and it ranges from 1,000 all the way up to 5,665 for the year. This is New York State net taxable income. The next program is the Excelsior Scholarship. This one is 125,000 as well, but it's federal AGI, not New York State net taxable income, and I don't know why they are different, but they are. This one can only be used at SUNY or CUNY schools. It cannot be used at private schools. This one does cover tuition expenses minus any other grant aid that their students are already receiving, such as TAP or Pell. So if they are getting full TAP, full Pell, they might already have tuition covered. They might not have to do Excelsior. If they're kind of closer to like the 80,000 to 125 range, then this might be something that they would, would want to look into if they're planning on attending a state school. It's a third application. So you have your FAFSA, you have your TAP application, and then Excelsior is a third one. The TAP application opened up October 1st. The Excelsior typically doesn't open up until sometime in April because it is based upon the state budget passing every single year, which doesn't happen until April typically. And then it's a short window. I believe the deadline's usually in like late July, early August for this. So it's a short window to be able to apply for the Excelsior program. It is a contract that they have to sign because they do have to agree to live or work in New York State for as many years as they received the Excelsior scholarship. So you can go on to the HESC website. It's hesc.ny.gov and search Excelsior, and you can see an example of the contract the students would have to sign. So please just make sure that they are, reviewing this before, applying for it and considering it. It can turn into a loan, an interest-free loan, which is good, but it can revert to a loan if they do move out of state, before their 3-4 years is up, depending upon however many years they received the scholarship for. New York State also has STEM scholarships, academic excellence scholarships. There's a lot of other niche ones like World Trade Center, memorial ones. If you lost someone in the line of duty. So there's a lot of different ones that they can go on and look. I do highly suggest that parents and families and students go on there to, to kind of peruse to see what might be available through the state. Okay, a couple more slides, I promise. We're almost there. I already mentioned private sources earlier. I wanted to mention it again. Again, if you can encourage the students to apply for either scholarships through your school district or locally, as I mentioned earlier, Community Foundation Greater Buffalo is a really good resource. There might be ones in other areas if you're not from Western New York. Just apply for as many as they can. Just apply. At the schools themselves, here at Niagara, we have like over 250 endowed scholarships that students can apply for. And sometimes it's things that we have no idea if they're eligible for until they raise their hand. So they really need to do that research. A lot of the scholarships typically open up in January, and are due, March or April-ish. Also on here, for private sources, I put private lenders. So if the parents don't want to go the Parent Plus loan route, and they want the loan to be in the student's name, they can do a private student loan. But 99% of the time, the student will need a cosigner for that. Typically, it's the parent, or another relative. One of the nice things I know some families like about the private loans is that a lot of them, the lenders offer cosigner release options after so many on-time payments. The cosigner is released from the loan and is fully in the student's name. Some of our families do a little bit of each. They'll take the federal loan student was offered, they'll apply for the plus loan for maybe, 5, 10, and then they'll do a private loan for another 5 or 10, like whatever the case might be. Some families like to divide it up. Now, the private loan process takes much longer than the Parent Plus loan. So definitely they need to give about at least a couple weeks for the entire thing to go through from start to finish. It does take a little bit longer for the approval to go through. This one is like a normal loan. It's going to be based upon the debt to income ratio, having employment, along with your credit history and credit score. So a lot more things are taken into account for the private loans as compared to the Parent Plus loan. All right, special conditions and appeals. So when they're doing the FAFSA for 26-27, you do have to use 2024 tax information, but of course things can change. It could be a reduction in income, a loss of job completely, a separation or divorce, whatever the case might be. If this is the case and the 2024 information from on the FAFSA no longer reflects an accurate depiction of the family household or the income, they can contact the schools. Now, if they're applying to 20 schools, I don't recommend doing it to all 20. Pick the top 3 or 5 schools that they're really interested in, contact either their admissions counselor they've been working with or their financial aid office, and ask them what their process is. Most likely, they're going to submit additional documentation. This could be 2025 taxes, current pay stubs, divorce decrees, proof of separate residences. We're going to need documentation. We get audited. We need to show why we would be making a change to the FAFSA. The point of submitting all this documentation is so that the financial aid offices can try to adjust the information that's on the FAFSA to hopefully increase the amount of aid the student is eligible for. So that's one option. The other option is that nothing has changed. Everything's the same. There's been no change in income or a number in household. And you get those financial aid offers. You're looking at them. You're like, I don't know. I really want to go to the school, but I just need a little bit more. Is there anything that you can do? So in that case, it's just what we would call like a normal appeal. Again, pick your top schools that you're looking at for this, and see what the process is. Now, unlike the special circumstances or professional judgment, where all schools have to at least take that into consideration, not all schools have to look at appeals. Some schools do not. Some more highly selective schools, they do not care about appeals. Locally, a lot of us, of course, we do review appeals. It's just kind of how it is these days. The worst we can say is no, and we might say no. It really just depends upon, the situation, how much funding may or may not be available at each school. So this can come from the student, it can come from the parent. I recommend explaining the situation, why the student's interested in that school, why they want to go, and maybe, if you're looking for an exact number or something along those lines. I do say be reasonable. If you're asking for like $10,000, it's probably not happening. Appeals, at least for us, they're more, we're not typically granting $10,000 appeals. Okay. So, but just kind of keep that in mind as you go through that process. Last thing, I will, if you need a copy of this, I don't know, maybe we can get a copy out or you can email me. But I recommend that students and families use something like this. They have to use Excel, whatever they want to use. But when they start getting those offers in, they need to really start comparing them to see what exactly and the net price will be at the end of the day. So what school is it? What are their tuition? What are their fees? Am I in a program that has additional fees? For example, at Niagara, our nursing, our business, our CIS, our theater, they all have program fees. Add that on there. Am I going to be living on campus at this school or am I commuting from this one? If I'm living on campus, am I going to be in a single room? Does that have an extra charge? Like you really need to make sure that you're really getting a full account of what those charges would be at each school, depending upon what your situation is. Then, okay, list your grants and scholarships. Did I get the Pell Grant? Did I get any state funds? Any institutional grants or scholarships? Am I taking my loans? Was I offered work study? Do I want to do the work study? Really break it down so you can, compare apples to apples. One, this will help you as a family make a good financial decision, for the next 2, 4, 6 years, whatever it might be. But also it can help in the students in the appeal process. And I say this because often when we get appeals, students or families are comparing us to another school. And they'll say, well, school B gave me $40,000 and you only gave me 30. Okay, well, school B gave you 40, but they cost 80, so you still owe 40. We gave you 30, but we cost 50, so you only owe 20. You really have to do that breakdown. And it, again, help you as a family to make decisions, or the family when you're helping them, but also when you do want to kind of compare one school to the next. All right, that's so much information. I get it. I'm going to stop sharing. And do you have any questions?
Just, Katie, thank you so much. That was, I mean, even for me as well, just unbelievably refreshing and internally hearing all of that. There's only one question in the chat right now, which is from Nancy. It asks, if the student has a grandmother as their legal guardian, would that be the person completing the parent section?
So if it's a true legal guardianship, custody in New York State is not considered legal guardianship. They might be able to do, so let me take this again. If it's a case of its custody, they would still, in theory, have to report parental information, but that would be the case where they say there's a section, and we didn't go over it, but there's a section saying that they're unable to provide, they have special circumstances, they can't provide parental information. If that's the case, the school would get that FAFSA, they would see that it's not valid, and they need to reach out to the student to ask for additional documentation. And we're going to try to do an override for you to make the student independent. If it's a case of legitimate, the paperwork says legal guardianship, or legal guardian, then the student would be considered independent and they would not need to report any parent information, and grandparent information unless they've legally adopted the student would never go on the FAFSA. So I hope that helps answer the question. So yes, there are times where the student is in a custody case situation and that they are really can't report parental information, but they don't meet the other qualifications. So they would say that they have an unusual circumstances, and they would complete their section. It would be technically an invalid FAFSA, but the schools would get that, see that that's what the case is and reach out to the students to get additional documentation.
Great. Thanks, Katie.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we only had one question in the chat box, so I guess it means you're very thorough, not making, not many
Maybe,
questions.
I don't know that or
No,
just
it
so
was
much
good.
information.
It was so good. Anything else last minute from anyone here? Thanks again for taking the time. We know how busy your schedules are, so it's much appreciated. Just a thank you in there. You're welcome. Anything else?
Thank you, ladies, so much.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
welcome.
yeah. Katie's an expert. It's fantastic. So we thank her very much. We're lucky. Yeah. And like I mentioned before, for those who joined late, as usual, the recording will be sent out to everybody. And if you want to pass it along to anyone else too. So, but thanks again for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, have a good day,
Katie, thank
everybody.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.